This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.
So, good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome here this afternoon. Time a little bit later than usual, but you're most welcome here, and to the people online who are also joining us. And we're delighted to be joined today by Guillaume de La Brosse, Head of Unit for Defence Policy Innovation at DG DEFIS, as it is now known. And Guillaume will speak to us for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll go to question and answers with our audience. And obviously those in the room will be able to answer questions by raising your hand, and those online can join the discussion using the Q&A function on Zoom, which will be on your screen. And we'll kindly request that you identify yourself and any affiliation that you have, because that is quite useful for the discussion. And a reminder that both today's presentation and the Q&A are both on the record. It's useful to consider the background to today's discussion. It's a very turbulent geopolitical environment, and the European Union has increased its efforts considerably to make sure that its citizens are protected, and also that the EU continues to support Ukraine to repel the Russian invasion, which now has gone on for a very long time. Guillaume will talk about the progress on the implementation of the White Paper for European Defence, Readiness 2030, as well as the work of the EU in meeting the challenges of an increasingly insecure world. And this white paper has produced many projects, and the progress of those projects and the finance associated with them, Guillaume will speak to us. The situation as it is has given rise to much questioning in the wider context of the solidity of the NATO commitment to Article 5, and even as we can see in the last EU informal meeting, there's what has come to the fore now is the questioning of Article 42.7. But just let me introduce Guillaume properly. He is currently Head of Unit Defence Policy and Innovation at DG DEFIS. Previously, he was Head of Unit in charge of Innovation and New Space Defence in the Commission, in the Directorate-General for Defence and Space. And Guillaume joined the Commission in 2016 as a member of the Commission's think tank and member of the UK task force, where he dealt with security, defence and space. And he has also served previously in the EDA, the European Defence Agency. So Guillaume, we're very pleased to welcome you, and pleased to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Hi. It's really a pleasure being with you today again. 1 year after I was there 1 year ago, just a few months after the publication of the white paper on European defence published by the Commission. So I'm very happy to continue that debate together with you today, and to give you an update on where we stand and what will come next, just before the Irish presidency. So, just as a reminder, I mean, the Commission published the white paper on European defence readiness with a clear objective in mind. That was to trigger a debate across the EU 27. We have 27 member states, 27 different histories, different geographical locations. So what's clear is that we all have a different way of assessing threats. The white paper, the primary objective of that white paper was to put on the table some kind of common assessment of which are the threats, how we assess the level of threats, so that again, member states domestically could trigger a debate on that level of threats, and which are the types of activities of actions that member states can engage to tackle that level of threats. So the primary objective was very much to again trigger debates, having in mind the specificities of each member states when it comes to its defense policy. that was the common foundation, and that has been the common foundation for all of us EU27 member states to advance along the line of a common agenda on defense. And that agenda has basically three key objectives. Objective number one, and I will elaborate. Objective number one is how can we, as a Commission, support member states, all EU27, in doing more in terms of defense equipment for their armed forces, and I will elaborate on that. Objective number two is how can we support the defense industry, meeting the demand coming from member states. And objective number three is how can we mobilize private investment in addition to public investment. When it comes to the objective number one, how can we stimulate member states investing more in defense equipment? So here we had different initiatives, but the key leverage was the Security Action for Europe, SAFE, 150 billion of loans raised by the Commission on the market and allocated to 19 member states on demand, up to member states to decide whether they want to be loan taker or not, up to member states to tell us how much they expect from the loans. But clearly the intention was to give more financial capacity to our member states to invest in defense equipment. That instrument is very much in the making. By the end of June, we are going to allocate initial payments to those 19 member states. And actually, against our expectations, that instrument was highly successful. We were not expecting such an uptake by member states. So almost all the 150 billion have gone in one go. We had initially in mind that maybe we need 2 rounds to allocate the 150 billion of loans. Second thing is that what we see that member states want to allocate this funding for common procurement. 2/3 will go to common procurement, which is an excellent news as well. We thought initially member states will use it on a national basis purely, but actually 2/3 will be used for common procurement, which is an excellent news. And the third element is we're not going to put that money everywhere. We're going to really focus on where we need to fill capability gaps. Give a few examples: maritime capabilities, cyber, space assets. So where clearly we do have gaps across Europe where we need to fill those gaps. So we're trying really to ensure that we invest where it really matters. And the fourth key objective is as well to make sure that we're investing in EU-based companies so that we do see a positive return investment on our industry. So that was objective number one of the Commission, to give immediately more means and capacities for our member states to invest in defense equipment highly needed by our armed forces, and to ensure again that in doing that, we enhance the level of interoperability between our armed forces. The second key objective was, since we're creating a big demand shock in putting on the market 150 billion of loans, how can we make sure that we have an industry that is able to supply what member states will need quickly? I forgot to mention that the 150 billion of loans, it has to lead to equipment delivered by 2030. So it's now. We're not talking about new programs. It's really about the equipment off the shelves to be delivered very quickly, which means that that money has to be absorbed by our industry, and our industry has to deliver on time, volume and scale what member states need. So that's the challenge number two that we were facing, and therefore the second key objective of the Commission: how can we make sure that we have an industry in Europe that is able to deliver at speed and scale? And that's a key question. Why? Because if we don't have an industry that is able indeed to supply, then member states will buy outside Europe. So clearly we have a vested interest to make sure that our industry is fit for purpose. So how to get there? So here we had different lines of activities. One was touching the regulatory environment. How can we have across the EU27 a regulatory environment that is more conducive to rapid investment of the industry in its production capacity, so what we call the industrial ramp-up. So touching the regulatory environment again to facilitate industry making investments in its production capacity, to expand the production capacity of the industry. This is about producing faster. What we want as well is an industry that is more agile, that can produce faster, but that can produce as well new disruptive products. And this is where we have a high interest in teaming up very closely with the business community of Ireland, because what we have in mind is to capture industry coming from AI, coming from space, coming from robotics, coming from cyber, coming from new ways of manufacturing. All those new entrants in defense, we call them new entrants, can put on the table highly innovative products and technologies, and very often at low costs. So that this kind of agility as well that we want to capture on the industry side. It's about expanding the size of our industry, and it's about having actors as well that can, again, produce low cost and very disruptive products for our armed forces, and that will be able as well to propose new business model to the legacy players. So it's about producing fast, it's about producing in a very agile manner, and it's about producing in Europe as much as possible. So clearly what we want as well is to ensure that our industry will benefit from this massive investments to come. Then the third priority relates to private investments. Indeed, we are unlocking lots of public investments, but we expect as well the private investment to come along the public investment. And here, basically, we want to have access to loans, access to risk capital. Access to loans matter very much for SMEs, established SMEs in organized, in structured supply chains. Very often they need to expand their production capacity, they need to get access to loans. They talk to their local banks. And very often the bank says, what's your business? You're dealing with defense? We can't invest in your company. This is that change of mindset that we want to change to make sure that SMEs can get access to loans, including to expand their production capacity. To do that, we are working a lot with the European Investment Bank, the EIB. Why? Because the EIB has deep pocket, but because the EIB is a bit of a standard setter. This is the bank in Europe, and if the day the EIB is changing its lending policy, saying I can do more in the field of defense, it has a spillover effect on other commercial banks, big banks and subsidiaries as well. So we're working a lot with the EIB to find a way for the EIB to change its lending policy and to do much more in defense. And indeed, we've managed over the past months to change the lending policy of the EIB that can do much more in the field of defense. That's good for SMEs, but that's good as well because, again, it has a spillover effect on other commercial banks. That's about loans. Now what we're doing as well is unlocking access to risk capital. Risk capital is key because this is the fuel that startups, scale-ups need to grow in a very fast manner. And therefore we need risk capital. So we need venture capitals, we need private equities, we need pension funds that are indeed willing to invest in defense-related companies. So here, again, we are working very closely with this investment community to attract, to explain what defense is about, how they can do exits, and make sure that we have an investment community that is fit for purpose as well for that kind of investment. So again, supporting member state, the demand side, supporting the industry, supply side, supporting the financial ecosystem. Of course, all that is conducive to supporting Ukraine, which is our first line in defense. So we are providing continuous support to Ukraine. We have to do even more now that the US is clearly telling us that it's our business in Europe to deal with Ukraine. So we have that instrument, the Ukraine Support Loan, that will provide up to 60 billion of loans to Ukraine for its defense. So it's about buying defense equipment. It's about paying the armed forces of Ukraine. So we are now the backbone when it comes to the support to Ukraine, and we need to do it because that's one way as well to contain the Russian threats. So this is really where we stand today. Now, what will come next? One of the big challenge that we face is that the level of threat has not diminished. We see violation of airspace through drones. We see pressure on sea cables, cyber attacks, spoofing, jamming. So the level of threat has not diminished. So we need to continue making such efforts. It's really about the fundamental role of member states, meaning ensuring security for our citizens. The question is, investing for defense equipment, that's one thing, but is that enough? So the big question in the upcoming months will be about what we call the population or society preparedness. So going beyond just what we call the material readiness. I think that there are some questions related to how do we prepare the population, how do we invest much more in the preparedness of the society so that we show that we are ready. And we need to be ready for any scenarios. So that's about tackling really the very basic foundation of our societies. But that's a debate that will have to happen, especially at a time, again, where we still have that threat coming from Russia, but we have as well that security challenge that is triggered by the US, telling us in a very blunt and direct manner, your security, that's your business. It's no longer our business. So, and that debate, we can't wait for the threat to materialize. We need to anticipate and we need to take actions to make sure that that threat will not materialize. It's about deterrence. And therefore, we certainly need to go one step beyond. So it's a long journey, we know, but this is really about ensuring that we remain an anchor of stability and security, Europe, and therefore that requires investments in budget-wise, but in terms of society as well. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. Mary, with that, I would be very happy to take any questions that you may have.
This podcast is brought to you by the IIEA, sharing ideas, shaping policy.